most diverse, we chase the light. Cohort Season 7 rise. On the blockchain we are wise. Innovation in our eyes.
You can, I guess I'll say next, if you can go to the next page. All right, so thanks everyone. I'm going to, talk, but then we can have a conversation if people have questions, or you can ask questions in the middle of it too, which would be, I like conversations better, which is what I organized like the session I did at MCon in Detroit this year. We did like a panel, but then everyone broke out into like 10 or 5 to 10 person group discussions, and like people led those like panels, but without being panels or a presentation, all 12 people get to talk about the actual thing that you're talking about. So rather than sit here and like me just, give a presentation, it's better if we can talk, and we have about 20 some people here. So this can be a conversation. So feel free to interrupt, but just for some background, my name is Sky. I've been a DAO contributor for probably the last 6 or 7 years. These are some of the DAOs that I am a part of or have been in the past. In the last couple of years, we've learned about how DAOs can actually disappear, they can dissolve, they can die on purpose, they can come to an end, they could come to stagnation. And we've kind of accepted that that's okay. And I think you guys have a DAO here for this Ray Guild cohort, and this may or may not last forever. It can change into new shapes and things like that. So, but creating a DAO for like a specific purpose is okay, and is actually a really good idea. And it can have a point where it stops being used too, and that's okay. So some of these DAOs that I've been in, like DXDAO and now Metacartel Grants DAO, are actually dead DAOs, are not doing anything. Next. So the topic of why decentralization matters, I think a lot of people in the space, I mean, you're hearing it if you read crypto Twitter, there's like, ETH's getting bashed, but it's like, and then the question is like, oh, well, ETH's decentralized and other ones are not. But there's always a spectrum of decentralization. But like part of the reason all of this whole space is being created is because of the problems and things we see with centralized systems, including money that a government can print, which then Bitcoin is the answer, a decentralized money that no government can print. Products that aren't being, that governments say people can't use or get attacked, and then building products that can't happen. And that's very interesting. So, and if you go next, you can add just go a bunch seven forward, instead of going one at a time. You just put them all, go 7. Yeah, put all the bullets there. So one more. So it's why decentralization matters. I always find it's easiest to talk about the problems with centralized systems, and then we'll very clearly get to why decentralization actually helps solve that. But in centralized systems, these are probably 7 very clear things that almost everyone here is aware of. We often have a single point of control, which has actually control of the system or thing we're using. That is also a single point of failure. So if something happens to that person, or someone does something to that person, then the thing that you're using is being controlled by someone who is attacking it. With that comes censorship, which is very clear, right? Any centralized system we're using basically on the internet, and the internet is very, very centralized because it just, in the early days, it was the DARPA or whatever, ARPA was decentralized, but it very quickly because of capitalism and things and efficiencies, it just, all of the things we started using just became centralized, and that's the way the internet grew, even though that's not really probably what it was supposed to do. And so we had this very system we used in the digital world. It's very easy to be centralized, and we also use very centralized real world systems too. But those become more local, and so you deal with local centralized problems rather than like someone controlling some like real world centralized system that goes around the globe, because we have countries and we have towns and we have things like that. But little or no user autonomy. So in these centralized systems, as a specific user has little control of their data, or no control of their data. They have very little say in the system, and they often just have to play by the rules set by the single leader. Inefficiency and bottlenecks, that's, for debate, but centralized systems often are like, they can run faster, so they're like efficient that way. But to do anything, you have to like go up through the ranks to get something done, because they don't have like permissionlessness, and so you can't just build something on something else. You have to actually ask for permission. The coolest thing I heard about like the internet just dividing into like Web 3 and Web 2 is there an API? So if there is an API that you need to get access to, meaning you have to ask someone for permission, then it's a centralized, likely Web 2 system and permissioned. If there is no API, then you can just build into it, do whatever you want. That is likely the Web 3 version of something. So like very, very high level, it's like, do you require an API access to like do anything into that system, is a very good way to explain it to people that aren't familiar with what Web3 is, and digital ownership and things. Data consolidation is like honeypots of data. So like centralized systems, we all know, like you literally give your data to someone and you're just like, okay, in the next 3 months, I'm gonna get a letter from some weird third party security agency that says there's a breach at that company, and that you can sign up for this system where they're going to cover the cost to like monitor your credit records. And you're like, sweet, thanks a lot again. Like, so you already know that when you give your data to one of these systems, it will be taken by some hackers, right? So that sucks. And there's no alternative in that. You have to do that to use those systems. Vulnerable to attack. The more centralized the system is, the more easy it is to attack it, because you only have to take control of like one of those centralized things to take over that system, or the ownership of it, or stopping the API or whatever it is. And then potential abuse of power is what centralized system has well, I'm seeing some comments. Potential, but I don't see the full comment because I'm looking at the slides. But we'll get to that. Can I open this at the same time? Let me see. Chat. Okay. Decentralized is not very invulnerable too. I would argue against that, and I will get into why. And potential abuse of power, yeah, centralized system can be very. So what's the opposite of that, Deacon, if you can go next? It's basically the opposite of all those things. No single point of failure or control, no censorship, users have autonomy, data owned by the user, hard to attack, and very hard to capture. That's actually what we want. So like we saw all the problems with the centralized system, the decentralized system. So well, these are what we actually want. And so what is that? That is what I would argue decentralization. And so we want decentralization in order to achieve these 7 parameter characteristics of a system, rather than the centralized ones that were really bad. Next. And so those are the characteristics. Next. And so a good example of a good example, you can get into lots of systems. So like Bitcoin being, a decentralized money that no single point controls. We know the benefits of that versus like government money. What else can we do? We can do lots of things. And one of those things is like building decentralized systems or decentralized products that can withstand the risks of the centralized system, or can fight those risks of the centralized system, and also get us like the characteristics that we want in a system that we're using. Next. And so I call this unconquerable products. And as Deacon was mentioning, we, yeah, so some in the spectrum of Web3 products, there's people that are building, lots of different variations across that spectrum. But at DXDAO, one of the things we were building products, and those products were being owned by the DAO, and the whole goal from the start was to build products that that were like fully decentralized across the entire stack. And so a good example is, so Omen is like Augur was the first original prediction market platform in Web3, and then Omen was probably the second. Omen was a permissionless prediction market platform which is what Gnosis from the start was wanting to build as a project. And they, as I said earlier, one of the things they realized is once they had this protocol built, once they had markets and things, if there was any centralized point that in the system that was owning or controlling or had the ability to manipulate the markets, then all of a sudden you have a centralized point of failure, and people could come after that centralized point and affect what the system or the markets and things. And so Augur was really early. It was even before Ethereum. Omen was effectively exactly what Polymarket is today. It runs on the same smart contracts, the Gnosis conditional token platform framework contracts. While Omen was trying to do it fully decentralized and fully permissionless, Polymarket was, which I'm sure most of you are aware of now, was doing it like a much more centralized, curated version where they created the markets and they settled the markets, and they slowly started to decentralize some of the stuff. But Polymarket is still, or at least in the beginning, it was way, way more centralized. And so unfortunately, in this scenario, for a number of reasons, the DAO and Omen are kind of abandoned right now, and Polymarket's thriving. And so the question is, like, what was the difference there? In that case, the curation played a really important role, I think. And when users just want to use a product that works, but behind the scenes, Polymarket still has some centralized points of failure that could be probably attacked and could be shut down by governments if they really wanted to. They spent a lot of time in court with their VCs, like explaining and fighting the government for why they were allowed to do what they were allowed to do. They were arguing they didn't need a like money transfer license and stuff because the funds are being controlled in smart contracts and things. And so they took one path. The decentralized paths of Augur and Omen seem to not have one, but there's more and more platforms that are gonna pop up, I think, in the prediction market space, and we'll see, like, in the long run which wins. And the coolest thing was the permissionlessness of Omen. Was anyone in the world can make a prediction, it can create a prediction market. And so on Polymarket, you can't make your own prediction market. And so if you like Futarchy, which is like governance based on prediction markets and things, the permissionlessness of a prediction market platform is really important. If you could go next, Deacon. I'll try to go through some of this a little faster. You can kind of scroll through a bunch of these slides, but when you have it, I'm going to talk here about kind of like what an unconquerable product is. And so when you have a front end of any product, even in Web3, where there's like a website controlled by a single person, there's a number of cases of this. If you can go in the next few slides, Deacon, there's like all of these DNS attacks, front end compromised, like a multi-sig compromised, multi-sigs, just people getting control of a few different things on a multi-sig. So multi-sig is like is more decentralized than a single person, but it's not as decentralized as a DAO. Another multi-sig, a DNS hijacking. Next, sanctions of a government or banning, code in certain cases, which is still, going to go to a court to see if this is even allowed in the U.S. Next, yeah. So those are all like multi-year old, like a couple of years old, but those like it's still happening today where we get these products that have big problems mainly because they're either getting attacked, they're getting taken over, the front ends are vulnerable, or the government is coming after like centralized team or yeah, in that case contracts. But um, if you could go next. Yeah, this is definition of unconquerable, but we'll skip that. Go next. Okay. And so like so this relates back to the Yeeter. The reason I love the Yeeter is if I was gonna tell someone like what crypto and Web3 has allowed in the world that like wasn't possible before, that's like use cases that are really, really game changing in the world. The biggest one I'd say is like global permissionless crowdfunding, right? And so we can do crowdfunding with like Kickstarter and like Venmo and stuff like that in the world, but it's not global usually, and it's not that fast. And so we had the ICO boom where like that was proven that that is a really, really powerful use case. Someone here can write a tweet, put it on Twitter today, and tomorrow with like an address, and tomorrow you could have people have sent you $5 million. If your idea is good enough, $5 million can show up to you tomorrow with like just people sending you money. So that's a very powerful thing, right? The problem with that was like getting rugged and what was the money used for and all that kind of stuff. And so that's where DAOs, and using decentralization to stop the risk of people running off with the money, people not doing anything, people not producing anything, stopping basically rugs, which is what I think you heard about in the last presentation. And so you combine those two, like a tool like DAO tooling or multisig or something, or a Yeeter that allows to prevent rugs, combine that with global crowdfunding, and you now have a very, very powerful tool that didn't exist, even 10 years ago. Just let the government into our heart. Bounty killer markets. Yeah. So there's yeah, what's easier to attack, a handful of people or a single person or this crowd? And so I would argue that when we said decentralized is not very vulnerable too. So the way DXDAO or anyone can own, it can have a decentralized collective that owns a product using ENS, where you access that product through ENS. In order to like attack that front end, you basically have to get a proposal through the DAO in order to update or put something into that front end, versus if someone's just using a normal .com, a DNS, if you get access to that DNS, you can just easily put a front end that looks a lot like the front end that they're expecting with some malicious code in it and cause massive problems right away. And so that part of that is like immutability. Part of that is making the control of anything that can be altered very, very hard, and often using decentralization to do that. Next slide. Yeah, so decentralization as our defense mechanism, just like in the Yeeter case, we prevent the ability for people to rug by making sure that when we yeet into something, there is some more than one person involved, so that you can't be rugged. And so you could give control of it to the DAO, the full DAO, everyone that eats in, or you could give control of it to a small, more or less decentralized, but still decentralized group of people, depending on what you need for that case. If it's like, a small amount and we're just doing something like Ray Guild, we don't need the the control of the money probably to be like the entire DAO together, because that might be overkill. But some decentralization is what prevents, Tay from just walking away with all the money that got yeeted into the yeeter. Next. Yep. And so as we go through an example of an unconquerable product, you got to think about all the different pieces. And as you guys are building products or coming up with ideas, you might not need to do all of this stuff from the start, but it's really good to keep all of this stuff in mind when you are designing your system, when you are designing a protocol, when you are designing a product or a front end or something. If you want it to be strong, if you want it to last, if you want to lower the risks, you want to keep we know that decentralization brings all of those positive characteristics. And so the more decentralized, the more we get of those characteristics. Next. So I'll go through this a little faster. What makes up a product? The code of the product, the back end, the front end, how you access the product, and the ownership of each of those things. And so just when you're making a simple product, any digital product, we're talking about digital products, not physical products. These are some of the things you need to think about to create Unconquerable. Next. And these are actually the things we couldn't do this before we had these things, basically. So when you're building digital products, you actually needed all these things in order to, or almost all these things in order to build an unstoppable or unconquerable product. You need, we can go to the next slide. Obviously, we need the internet. Like if someone mentioned turn off global power supply. So yes, we need power, I think, and we need the internet. It's getting better to have like an unstoppable internet with things like Starlink, right? So like if ISPs or whatever are shutting down certain things in certain countries, but if you can get access to an open internet, that's key to like accessing things like public blockchains and unstoppable products. Next is assuming you have the internet, you basically need like some public open blockchains, and you need that because you don't want to be if you're dependent on the cloud for your product, whatever cloud you're using, they could shut it off, right? They can just stop access to whatever you want there. So that can be like, we could think about decentralized clouds, which are like Arweave things, which are blockchains as well. So like open permissionless blockchains, which allow us to anyone in the world with access to the internet to like do something on that blockchain is important. And the risk of like, some blockchains like maybe Binance or even Base at this point, you could argue you could put something on those chains and there's some centralized, we saw it with Blast actually, there's some centralized points of failure in there on some of those L2s that they can make you do whatever they want, and there's nothing you can do about it. So open, decentralized, permissionless blockchain, generally a layer 1, is probably important at that point. Ethereum is a good example of that. There are others, but Ethereum is what allows you to put this immutable code onto the blockchain instead of into the cloud. So that becomes really important. If Ethereum as a blockchain gets attacked, that is also a problem. So it has to be strong and sufficiently decentralized enough that the blockchain itself can't really be attacked. Tools for decentralized coordination, that is DAO tooling. And that DAO tooling has come a long way over the last 6 years. And we know that Moloch DAO tooling is great. We know that other DAO tooling is great. Governance Bravo and what has been built on top of all those, all the front ends that you use to access that stuff. Things like Yeeter, also built on Moloch DAOs, safes. The tooling is amazingly progressed from where it was, and people keep building more tooling, and it's getting better, and we're still building tools on things that we need to improve in the DAO decentralized collective world. But it's amazing like what you can actually do with this tooling today on these blockchains. Next. In our case, if there's two main ways. Like when you're talking about a front end, you can either have like Liquidity is a dollar stable token backed by ETH platform, and they achieve some decentralization by having their smart contracts on Ethereum. So your smart contracts, depending on if they're immutable or controlled by something or some decentralized collective, or if it's a person that can manipulate it, that's a problem. That's a centralized point of failure. But you can one way to achieve some decentralization is like the Uniswap protocol or the liquidity protocol is accessed by many, many different front ends. And so you can have like lots of different front ends that allow users to access a single protocol on Ethereum. And in Uniswap's case, that protocol is immutable. And so you achieve some decentralization in your access through multiple front ends. And then the other way is to have like a decentralized collective, like DXDAO was, that owns an ENS, such as swapper.eth, and the front end is at swapper.eth on IPFS. And so you see two different types of decentralization there. One is mini front ends to access one protocol, and one is a one single front end controlled by a decentralized entity that the only way you can change or update that is through a proposal of the decentralized entity. And so both are different. Those are two different ways. Some would argue having many different front ends can be a little scary and risky because, like, what if you use one that's not correct, or what if it was a scam? And so you kind of have to have some knowledge of like which of the front ends are okay to use. Like, I know that if I use, DeFi Llama Swap and it trades on Uniswap protocol, I know that DeFi Llama Swap is pretty good and it's safe and it's checked, it's open source and people use it. If I use some like random swap front end to trade on Uniswap and I don't know what it is, there is a risk there. But then if I go to swapper.eth, swapr.eth, I know that if I go to the front end that's sitting behind that ENS, I know that that is deployed by, it used to be deployed by a DAO. Now there's a swapper team, but that's another way to achieve decentralization. Next. So IPFS, IPFS is important in this case because IPFS is this decentralized kind of cloud that allows, and this could maybe be Filecoin, an incentivized version, or Arweave, where the ENS points to the front end that's deployed onto those decentralized, or peer-to-peer kind of file storing systems. And so the way that you do it is you go to an ENS, and the ENS is pointing to the latest approved version of the front end that the DAO has deployed, basically. And there's a whole system for how you're doing that and doing updates because you want to make sure that the DAO approves any changes to that. But no one can come in and like take control of that front end and like manipulate it without doing an actual proposal that passes through the DAO, which would be very hard to do. What does front end mean in context mean? Front end would be like the UI that you use to access the protocol or the smart contracts that are running the actual back end of the application. And when you're building this, so Radical was, I don't think Radical is doing well. There's one called Source, but we really also want, and we've seen this in the news, we actually really want a decentralized way to store code that is being built and worked on. Most people are using GitHub. There's a lot of centralized points of failure there. So building a decentralized version of GitHub is important, and no one's, I don't think, succeeded at that yet. But that like they've shut down some GitHubs on code and things. Usually people have copies of that, so it's not like a game changer. Like if a repo disappears, but like people have copies of it, like it can survive in other places, and especially if the code and the contracts are on Ethereum, then you have access to them. What else is important? Next. Oh, so um, yeah. So the other really important thing that we kind of like make an assumption is the actual code. So to have a unconquerable product that is holding up from the smart contracts and is being accessed through a sturdy unconquerable front end, if there's problems with the code or there's mistakes or it can get hacked or someone can change it, if someone has access to it and can alter it or do something and take money out of different vaults or whatever, that's also a problem. So the code, being people verifying, people seeing the code, not having any risks in the code is really, really important. um, you could, devs don't like to hear it, but if like if we didn't have all these if we had better systems and better procedures for building safer code and safer management of funds and things like that, and like all of the money that basically North Korea got access to in the crypto world, and some is like just individually attacking, individual people, getting their seed phrase and stuff. But when there's big exploits in like millions and millions of dollars in DeFi contracts or multi-sigs getting compromised and things, that's money that was ending up in terrorists' hands, or not terrorists, but terrorists and other bad people's hands. And that was money that was basically then being put through, open privacy tools that other people were using also. But if we had way less money being compromised in the space, we might still have access to some of these privacy tools that we don't now. Um, so part of the thing is this whole language and all these systems are very new, and so there were big risks with all of them, and hopefully our systems get better so that when we do these audits, how many times have these contracts been audited and there's still problems and hacks happen and things like that and manipulations. And so figuring out how to eliminate those as much as possible is obviously overall better for the space. And then privacy, not having tracking, not having reporting. Most people I know prefer to use front ends and things where there's not tracking happening, especially in the Web3 space. There are, for example, Shapeshift is a DeFi front end that it's owned by a DAO that allows you to go and use different protocols in DeFi. If you don't want to use their front end, that's even, I think, is giving the DAO some affiliate and stuff like that, you can use like private version of Shapeshift. So they allow you to use the private version, and that's like with no tracking at all and no affiliate and nothing. So giving that option to people, I think, is also good. And we still need to figure out how we can better use Web3 altogether and with way more privacy than exists. And there's basically very little or no privacy in the current systems we use, which is also a problem. Separate issue though. Next. Next. Yeah. So there's some example of like when Tornado Cash got, attacked or, shut down. It shares like a whole bunch of the things that were gone after in order to make it very hard to use. And so Americans basically have stopped using it, but the rest of the world is still using it. But these centralized points in the system of how to access the protocol, because the protocol still runs on Ethereum, but how you access it, these all got shut down basically. So I'm not actually sure how people are accessing now, but people are still using it. You can use the contracts directly because they're immutable. Next. Yep. You can go next. Next. Kind of talked about that. Yeah, front ends also like can censor, but if Uniswap front end, censors the tokens that you can trade, or they take a fee through their front end, which they are, and they're making a lot of money. You can still use the Uniswap protocol through some of the other front ends, and you can still access the tokens you want. But censorship is, how to solve this. So I think if you could just go next, Deacon. I think this is generally the end of the presentation. I talked about liquidity next. Oh yeah, decentralized infrastructure is a key part of this. Like at the end of the day, we don't want this whole system built on like a bunch of centralized infrastructure. And so if you can stake your own ETH, like having a DApp node so that Ethereum stays decentralized and we can build all these systems on a decentralized system where there's no, if you're using everyone's using one RPC and they're censoring certain transactions and things, that's a problem. So keeping it peer-to-peer, keeping it decentralized, decentralization is usually the best defense to censorship and anything else. So running your own infrastructure is a fun way to do it. Yeah. I will stop here. I think okay. Just go through the next slides real quick, Deacon. Yeah, that's in the DAO playbook. That talks about why DAOs are important, which is like built on top of why decentralization is important. You can skip this though. I'll go back one actually. So high level, when people are like, well, okay, now you guys all like heard why I think decentralization is important because it gets us all those properties that we need. But like high level, when you're building a Web3 product and it's like, well, do we really need to be decentralized? Could we just have like, centralized, stuff happening and whatever? Like it's okay, but like if the goal is not to move to like the decentralized version of a system or a group or something, I guess my whole point is the world already has the centralized version of pretty much every system. So building another version of that system that's like not really decentralized, but just build it on Web3 is not really that interesting. And so it's, in my mind, it's probably a waste of time. And so if we need to figure out and get the properties of how the decentralized system works, we actually need the truly decentralized products to exist and make them as good as possible, and ideally make them work even better than Web 2 stuff. And so that is the path we're on. Can we make the Web 3 experience even better than the Web 2 experience? And right now it's probably harder and it's jankier and all that stuff. But we have to build the decentralized systems with the properties that we want. Otherwise, we're just running into a wall. And so always think about that when you're making decisions. And sometimes it's the harder path to take, or sometimes you in the near term choose the centralized path and move towards the decentralized path. But at the end of the day, the decentralized version is actually what matters. So keep that in your thoughts while you're building or thinking about or debating or discussing. And if you have any questions, that's the end of the presentation. I guess I talked for 35 minutes, but if you have any questions, feel free to ask. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, what do you think about for example, centralized blockchains like Solana, where you exchange this decentralization for efficiency?
So I mean, I like, so I'm not a big fan of Solana, but I actually don't, I wouldn't call Solana a centralized blockchain. From what I think they have like thousands of nodes. So their goal is to be not as they don't have no plans to be as decentralized as something like Ethereum or Bitcoin. But if you have thousands of nodes all around the world that can't be censored, and I don't think we have many examples of them trying to be censored by a government or something. And when they asked, the last time I heard them ask, like, totally, if Tornado Cash is on Solana and like the government comes to tell you to do something, like, what are you gonna do? And he got like, he couldn't answer the question. He got real nervous. So like they haven't had that scenario yet that I know of. That was a year ago or 6 months ago. So I wouldn't call it centralized, but they also have a different, yeah, but you are correct that they have a different view to have like everything on one layer, which is a separate interesting idea. But I actually don't think it's like scalable, because at some point you're probably going to need L2s on Solana. Like L1 can only take so much, even if you keep expanding it. And as they keep needing more and more capacity, it can become more and more centralized. And so even though it's might be kind of decentralized now, if it gets harder and harder to run nodes, then it will become more centralized. And so becoming more centralized is not the goal of what most people want. But the trilemma, the decentralization trilemma is a real thing. The path that Ethereum's choosing is, pretty hardcore. But if you look at this L2 system, the same things that people are complaining about, like a lot of these L2s currently are pretty centralized and have obviously centralized sequencers and can censor and things like that. So that's also an issue. But you can still use Ethereum mainnet however you want, and even nothing can really be censored. But I think, I think like anything that's okay, like Binance Smart Chain, where like there's 20 nodes, I think, and a bunch of them are controlled by like a more centralized group of people or something. That's a lot scarier to use in terms of being dependent. And so if you know that exists, you're probably not gonna decide to build on it. And one good example is, all these L2s are being chosen to be built on Ethereum rather than other L1s. And that just like proof is in the pudding. It's kind of accepted that the Ethereum L1 is decentralized. And if I'm a company, if I'm Kraken, if I'm Base, if I'm whatever, I'm going to launch an L2. I'm probably going to put it on Ethereum. And if we start doing like billion-dollar transactions or trillion-dollar transactions by governments and things like that, I'm guessing that those will also want to be on like a clearly decentralized, hard to attack blockchain. So as the numbers get bigger and bigger, I think decentralization for the really big transactions is going to continue to matter a lot. But L2s and L3s and stuff will all have their own use cases, which come with less decentralization for sure. Hope that was a good answer.
Pretty decent.
Quick question. What dApps do you think need to be created in like the next couple of years to kind of drive like mass adoption of crypto or blockchain technology? I think there's not really a massive focus on that at the moment. I think everything is very like niche down, like specific. So
Yeah.
I'd like to kind of pick your brains in that respect.
Yeah, the ones that global, so things that make like your parents or your friends can use that are not Web3 people, that allow them to do global permissionless crowdfunding in a curated good way, which then that includes like they can make payments really easily. So kind of like a global crypto Venmo or we payments or whatever. So some type of global crypto, probably in dollars, right? Like we don't all need to be sending around ETH or Bitcoin or whatever. So like the dollar stable token market or a stable token market in general, of any currency or whatever, is becoming bigger and bigger. We know it's a big use case. There's like $40 billion of Tether on Tron. There's lots of dollar stables on Ethereum. but like allowing anyone in the world to like send $25 to a cause. So maybe it starts with like not for like building a product or something, but like we all have a cause. Like, and Yeeter is kind of a perfect case for this, but like making it so that anyone in the world has that crypto, has the easy access to it, has the payments. So like global decentralized crowdfunding, manage keeping the systems that allow that so that it can't be rugged. So ideally something like tracking. So I mean this isn't my idea, but Giveth is one of my favorite products in general. If you use Giveth and you look at everything that it actually does in the background, it's really, really amazing. And you actually give to projects now. You can stream to projects, you can give to projects, it has QF, whatever. But they're hopefully going to do something like causes. So I can just say, I want to stream money to solving a cause, and that cause is clean water all around the world. And so I just start streaming money to the cause of clean water all around the world. And the system that Giveth has put behind it gets that money to the right places, and it's all trackable so that the money that I give to that cause ends up creating true value around in solving the cause that I want to solve, right? And so that people have enough causes in the world. Everyone cares about something, and the cause can be like saving the environment. That cause can be feeding the homeless, something like that, or that cause can be like collecting rare cars or collecting, some passion or something, or celebrating some passion, funding people that are, if you love clowns, like you want to fund creating new clowns in the world, right? So the cause can be anything. And allowing people, right now there is no way for me to fund creating more clowns in the world, right? That will exist probably in the next 5 years. I can give money towards creating more clowns in the world, and there's a system that actually efficiently gets it to the right places and shows me how it's tracked. So like, yeah, causes, getting money or assets or resources that people have to the causes that they want to solve is
Yo, check the mic 1, 2. Squeak, squeak, it's Hammy G. Descending into the abyss where things get funky. See, this ain't no Disney flick, no cheesy cartoon chase. The smallest layer, a bureaucratic soul-crushing space like Dante's Inferno, with more paperwork and fees and demonic interruptions.